you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to each of the witnesses who are here today. Chief Comstock, please, thank you for your service, and please express my gratitude to the men and women who were first responders who were there when this horrific tragedy occurred, and thank you for their courage and the difference that each of them makes in the community. Chair Homendy, let me thank you also for the professional way in which the NTSB has approached this accident. I think you have been a truth teller. I think you have managed to avoid politics and focus on the substance of what caused this accident and how we can prevent it. And so it's not that often that we get to thank a public official for doing a good and effective job. I think you provided also some helpful suggestions in your testimony that I'm certain the committee will look closely at the specific suggestions you put forward. As I look at what caused this derailment, there are a number of factors, but one factor that from the early reports stands out is the hot box detectors. We now know that the train derailed past 3 hot box detectors prior to the derailment. 30 miles away, the reading was 38 degrees above ambient temperature. Then 20 miles away, it had risen to 103 degrees above ambient temperature, so it had risen dramatically. And then just prior to the derailment, it was 253 degrees above ambient temperature, reflecting that the bearing had locked and derailment was imminent. Mr. Shaw, why did this trend in temperature not trigger an alert earlier to stop the train? And in particular, why were you not able to stop the train after the second reading had gone from 38 degrees above ambient temperature to 103 degrees above ambient temperature?
Senator, thank you for that question. I'll note that the NTSB report indicated that the crew did nothing wrong, and we certainly thank them for that. The hot box detectors were working as designed, and there were no track defects. Since the derailment and the preliminary results of the NTSB report, we led the rail industry, and the rail industry has also implemented implementation of far more hot box detectors across our network. We're adding 200 hot box detectors on our network to reduce the spacing between our hot box detectors. Our hot box detectors are already spaced amongst the lowest in the industry, and I think Mr. Jeffries had indicated that the entire industry was adding about 1,000 hot box detectors.
Mr. Shaw, perhaps you didn't hear my question, so let me ask it again. The first hot box measured 38 degrees above ambient temperature. As I understand, the ambient temperature was about 20 degrees, so that was roughly 58 degrees. 10 miles later, the second hot box measured 103 degrees above ambient temperature. That's an increase of over 60 degrees in 10 miles. Why did Norfolk Southern not stop the train then and examine the bearing to make sure that it didn't melt the axle and that you didn't have a derailment? If you'd stopped then, it would have prevented the derailment. So my question is, why did the second hot box reading not trigger action?
Senator, my understanding is that that second reading was still below our alarm threshold, which is amongst the lowest in the industry. In response to this, the industry has agreed to work together to share best practices with respect to hot box detectors, trending technology, and thresholds.
So when you and I visited my office yesterday, you said your threshold is now 170 degrees above ambient temperature. As I understand it, at the time of the derailment, your threshold was 200 degrees above ambient temperature. So you're right, 103 was not 200 degrees. As you and I discussed, I've spoken with your competitors, other Class 1 railroads who have indicated that trending technology and algorithms can measure significant changes in temperature, and in particular can flag that when it goes from 38 degrees to 103 degrees, you need to stop and take a look at it. Mr. Jeffries, let me ask you in terms of how other railroads handle it. What is the technology that is available to spot this problem before it's gotten so bad that a derailment is imminent?
Well, thank you for that, and that's a spot-on question, and that's one of the three things we're focused on as in the industry. So one is the physical deployment of approximately 1,000 additional detectors. Two is creating the industry standard of 170 degrees as a critical threshold. And the third one is really looking at industry best practices to examine and potentially adopt new algorithms for trending detection so that if there is a dramatic spike in temperature, even though it may be below that absolute threshold, it's caught. And so we've brought the entire industry together, and over the next month, we'll be reporting out, okay, what can we learn from each other, and what are the best practices we can adopt, and what other steps need to be taken based on the information we have and the predictive analytics we can put into place.
And if I could ask one final question,
Yes, and Mr. Whitaker was trying to weigh in there. I don't know if you
Mr. Whitaker, sure.
not.
If,
I don't know
I
if you
didn't
want-
see that, but sure, I would welcome you.
Thanks for acknowledging Senator Cruz. I'd like to just make note that trending defect detector technology, from being in the cab of a locomotive, when we pass a defect detector, it trends to a office like Norfolk Southern in Atlanta, Georgia. It doesn't convey to the railroad crews, which is a problem in this incident as well as many others that still continue to this day. What we need as a train crew, which they say they listen, they haven't been listening for quite a while. We need to be notified whenever these trending detectors are seeing this car trend hotter. That way we can keep a better eye on it, or even stop, inspect that rail car.
Sure.
But as it stands right now, even after East Palestine, it's all about moving the train. That's all PSR is. That's all they care about. So right now, they tell the train crew to stop your train, set your brakes in a full service application, then release. And hopefully that releases whatever the case may be. When the safest cause case should be, we stop and go back and inspect. That's what the conductor's there for. That's why a two-person crew is essential.
So that's very helpful. So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, that having real-time reporting of what the sensors are showing for the conductor, the engineer, would be helpful. Mr. Jeffries, are there technological barriers? Are there impediments to giving the crew real-time reporting of what's happening?
So I can't get into the technicalities of that, but I will say one thing we are focused on with any sort of regulatory requirement on wayside detectors themselves is that we do need to be given the opportunity to evolve our technology, because continuous onboard detection is the next phase of sensors and detection. And so certainly that's something we're interested in and interested in further deploying and further developing.
Well, as we're drafting this legislation, I would ask you to please, if there are technological issues we should know about, please let us know, because I have to say what Mr. Whitaker said there makes a lot of sense to me. And if there's a reason it's not yet feasible, we need to know about it, because that seems to me a reasonable element for legislation. Mr. Whitaker, yes, and my time's gone, but go ahead, Mr. Whitaker.
I apologize. I do think it's very important to shed some light on this. It is feasible. The technology is there. Several days after East Palestine, we almost had a similar incident in Cleveland area on Norfolk Southern. The crew, the defect detector said no defects to the crew. The train dispatcher came on and said, hey, we have a report of a trending defect detector on the train. We need you to stop and inspect it. Immediately after that, the chief dispatcher, which is the person that controls the whole railroad, told them to keep going. If it were not for an eastbound train passing them and instructing them, hey, your train's on fire.
Wow.
Stop your train. And we set that car out. They had to walking speed this car 5 miles. So the technology is there. They're just raising and lowering their thresholds to move freight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's clear that for too long, the rail industry has been raking in profits and putting safety on the sidelines. Mr. Whitaker, do you agree that the East Palestine derailment